This is Run Jessie, Part 1 by Songbird. Waking with a low, pained groan at her already aching head, Jessie lifted her head off of the ground, and lifting herself up onto her elbows with effort, she swept her gaze over the immediate area. Her forehead creased as she realized she had no idea where she was. From her initial sweep, she could tell that it was late, the moon was high overhead, and that she was in the middle of a field of some kind. A low, hollow breeze was stirring the tall grass all around her. Despite the full moon, visibility was shoddy at best, and as she sat there, feeling nausea set in as her migraine pounded away hard behind her pained eyes, she wished she had a flashlight. "Where the hell am I?" she managed softly as her eyes swept over her surroundings, feeling her stomach clench uncomfortably as she realized how small her voice sounded in the darkness, feeling it closing in all around her. Am I dreaming? Feeling the dirt bite into her knees, she looked downward, and her forehead creased as she realized she was still wearing her green spaghetti-strap nightshirt and her black sleep shorts, and that her feet were bare. Well, that answered that question, she reasoned, shifting back onto her backside and drawing her knees into her chest, lifting her hands to brush the loose gravel and dirt off of her knees. "Good evening." A low voice suddenly spoke in the darkness, and she leapt to her feet, whirling around to see who had spoken them. She swallowed hard as she stood there, realizing she was still alone in the field, with the darkness feeling oppressive all around her, leaving her feeling very much exposed as she stood there with nothing to defend herself with. "You didn't think you were all alone here, did you, Jessie?" The voice came again. And again she whirled to look behind her, her long hair whipping around her shoulders with the action, forcing her to lift her hand to sweep it back out of her face to keep her vision clear. Again she found only darkness all around her, and she felt the low breeze stir the hair hanging down around her ears as she panted heavily in the wake of her fear, her heart hammering hard against her ribs as ice shivered its way down her spine. "You're not alone." The voice came once again, and she swallowed hard. "It's just a dream," Jessie assured herself. "Are you sure?" The voice smirked practically in her ear now. Gasping and spinning around hard as she took a step backwards, she sucked in a sharp breath through gritted teeth as she lifted her left foot almost immediately after stepping down on it, bending to rub her thumb over a small cut made by a sharp rock she hadn't noticed before she stepped down on it. "Who are you?" she whispered under her breath, searching the darkness with her eyes as she stood there, feeling exposed and feeling her foot throb softly. "Why aren't you running, Jessie?" The voice again, and again she whirled to no effect, keeping her weight on her good foot and the front of her left foot to keep dirt from getting into her cut. "Because you're not real," she said through gritted teeth, her eyes searching the darkness for any sign of movement. "I'm as real as you are." The voice was lowered even further still, barely audible now above the low whisper of the wind as she stood there, scouring the darkness with her sweeping gaze for any sign of whoever it was who was speaking to her. She was trembling all over now as fear and panic began to set in, feeling more than anything that she was being watched by whomever it was. Turning when she heard footsteps from behind her, she gasped and whirled to find her wide eyes meeting the gaze of an imposing figure a full head taller than she was, if not taller. His eyes, more than anything of his figure swirled in darkness, she saw his fathomless black eyes, and she felt her blood turn to ice in her veins as his soulless eyes gazed right back into her own eyes. Who are you? She breathed softly, holding his gaze and unable to move as they stood there face to face. What is this place? She asked, shifting her weight awkwardly beneath his cold gaze, biting back a low grunt of pain as she accidentally stepped down onto her cut foot. We're in your head, Jessie. His lips curled into a creepy, leering sort of smile as their eyes held. What? She regarded him curiously, her look confused in the wake of his words. I've always been here, he murmured, taking a single measured step towards her as their eyes held. Suddenly he came forward and she cried out as he shoved her hard with both hands, knocking her flat onto her back, sending a jolt of pain shockwave style through her body as her elbows and her backside hit the ground hard only a second before the back of her head hit, making her vision swim as she blinked hard, grunting softly from the pain of impact as he stood there, staring down at her with his soulless eyes, the same cruel, leering grin on his lips. Time to run, Jessie. He chuckled lowly as he watched her with those cold eyes towering over her. Why? Jessie blinked, shaking her head and trying to clear the dazed feeling that clouded her mind, forcing herself to sit up before him and lifting herself onto her knees. Why are you doing this? She gasped as he bent suddenly, taking a firm grip on her arms. Then she cried out in pain as she felt the sensation of searing pain in her flesh beneath his touch, and she felt him lift her onto her feet as though she weighed nothing at all. Suddenly he shoved her away hard, making her pinwheel her arms and stumble over her own feet to keep from falling. And feeling a jolt of pain shoot up both of her outer arms, she lifted her right hand, turning her gaze to her left upper arm and letting out a soft gasp as she realized that her skin was red and raw where he'd gripped her, as though she'd been burned by his touch. Run for me, Jessie, he purred, his low voice rumbling at her as his dark eyes glittered in the darkness, making the hair on the back of her neck stand up as she turned her head and lifted her wide eyes to meet his gaze. Feeling her heart already pounding in her chest at the hungry look in his dark eyes as they held her own, Jessie turned on her heel, taking off running headlong into the darkness as fast as she could manage on one good foot without looking back, feeling the cool night air sting as it passed over her newly injured arms. His grin broadened as he watched her head off into the darkness, and he bowed his head, his eyes still following her as he stood, otherwise unmoving, for the moment, giving her a head start. I like it when you run, he purred in his low, rumbling voice as his grin spread across his face in the darkness, his dark eyes glinting hungrily as he started off after her. That's the end of Run, Jessie, Part 1. I hope you guys enjoyed it and that you stay tuned in for Part 2. This has been Songbird. Sleep well, guys.